So this is the electric vehicles financial effect on the car world by me, Philip Hirschel. So some context for this. Cars started as a very expensive mold, essentially only for the elite. And when Henry Ford came around and invented the Model T, he laid the groundwork for the sales model for all cars now. He created a car that hoped that he wanted everyone to be able to afford, or at least most people, and wanted to provide a mode of transportation for the common man. He wanted to create a universal car, affordable and useful to all. And companies have been driving to make cars cheaper to appeal to the lower income people, following the same model since then. They wanted to create cheaper and cheaper and cheaper while still maintaining that quality so that people can be happy and lower income people can't afford those cars. Now, as time has gone along, EVs have been introduced into the market, but what exactly are EVs? Well, electric vehicles run on electricity as opposed to gas, and they can be charged in your home or in public at superchargers at places like malls or grocery stores. And then as opposed to gas vehicles, they use gasoline, which everyone knows, and for future reference in the study, they're going to be referred to as ICEVs, or internal combustion engine vehicles. And essentially what they do is instead of using electricity, they use small explosions by combining compression, air, and gasoline to create small explosions to create forward propulsion. Now, what's my research question regarding this? Well, I want to know, how has the introduction of electric vehicles into the market affected car prices on the used car market? And why is this important? Well, for me personally, I've always been very, very interested in cars since I was a little kid. I've gone to car shows with my dad, with my little brother, and I've always found cars to be very interesting. And with the advent of EVs, I've seen the car industry change a lot with prices and just the way people look at cars as a whole. Now, why is it important to you though? Well, I believe that with the changing prices of cars and the fact that everyone reading my paper and everyone listening to this presentation will probably be on the car market sooner rather than later, I think it's very important to recognize what may have changed in the car market and how people should address buying a car, whether it be used or new. So, my lit review. The first thing I wanted to find out was what's the best way to analyze the used car market? Well, over time there's been a lot of ways people have tried to analyze the used car market. And big economists like J. Joel Kim, Deborah Alexander Kim, and Colin Vance have all formulated different ways to analyze used cars. However, the one that stood out to me was Purohit's because it was a combo of both qualitative and quantitative data, while some of the other ones only have one of the two. His includes, but isn't limited to, a change in horsepower, attributes, style, sister, which are like competitor cars, age effects, brand, and downsizing. And he basically includes all of those when analyzing how used cars get their price. Another thing I wanted to look at was the true effects of EVs and how that may impact price. Well, ICEVs produce a specific air pollution called fine particulate air pollution, which contributes to 3 million to 4 million annual deaths worldwide. So way more than we even realize. A lot of people believe that factories are the big cause for pollution or big things like that, but when there's so many internal combustion engine vehicles on the road, they do create a mass pollution, and that's what causes these deaths. And EVs hope to limit that as much as possible. And how much do they limit that though? Well, a test was run, a 10,000 kilometer test, and it was run with a Corolla and a Toyota Corolla and an EV. And when they went 10,000 kilometers, a Corolla emitted 2,000 kilograms of CO2e, that same fine particulate air pollution, while a EV only emitted 1,387 kilowatt hours of the CO2e, so a considerable amount less. Now, finally, I wanted to look at the demand for EVs. How much demand actually is there, and is it a significant enough amount for the study to be viable? Well, 6 in 10 prospective car buyers have some interest in purchasing an electric vehicle. So that's obviously a significant amount if you really think about how many people are in the market for buying cars. And it's not just the people in the market, it's also the companies making the cars that are also complying to this demand. By 2030, Volkswagen and Ford expect their sales to be 50% EVs, and Toyota expects to be selling 3.5 million EVs annually. So they expect their profits and sales of EVs to skyrocket in the near future. Now, what's my gap? So nobody has studied how the introduction of EVs is affecting the used car market as a whole, as most people studying the used car market just isolate the price fluctuations specifically. I wanted to look at more general trends and stuff that can come up in the used car market when the EVs have been introduced. So my method. The first step that I found was to set a baseline for what cars were to be studied. I wanted to look at EVs and ICE EVs and how they can be compared, and I wanted to look at a sedan, a mid-size SUV, and I wanted to include a truck, but in the end it was omitted because essentially what happened was there's not a good enough truck on the EV market for me to do a study on it. There was only a good enough sedan and mid-size SUV because the parameters for the study were a similar price, similar size, and they had to be high selling in the United States, which is the big thing that the trucks failed at. So the final decision I came to when choosing the cars for the study were for the sedans, I chose an Audi A4 for my ICE EV and my Tesla Model 3 for the EV. And then for my midsize SUV, I chose a Ford Edge and the Tesla Model Y. So the original idea was to model it after Demorat-Perovit's equation, as I talked about earlier, and add a sort of sense that could determine the price of an EV, because this equation is from a long time ago when there were no EVs. So I had to add on data that would be somewhat compliant to the EV market and things like that, demand and the environmental effect. So after a lot of studying, I found out the best way to do it would be by adding a numerical value that elaborates on the critical reception of electric vehicles, how people actually like them. A value for the demand for EVs, what percentage of people can actually afford an average EV at a given time, because EVs are typically, on average, more expensive than a gas vehicle, and a quantified environmental effect of the average EV in the context of making choices in purchasing the EV. So I wanted to see how much does knowing that environmental friendly aspect of the car change your opinion on how you're gonna approach buying the car. And then I also wanted to collect data from across used car websites. And over time, after collecting a lot of data, I actually realized that some of the websites that I used were aggregate car websites, so they would collect data from multiple listing sites and use it and put it in one spot, so it was kind of taking from a bunch of different places that may not have been trustworthy. And so I decided to find websites that were non-aggregate, and I wanted to make sure that my cars fit a certain parameter, and that I wanted their age range to be when they were in production from 2015 to 2021, and in a mileage range of 10,000 to 100,000, because I wanted them to be old enough to where they were considered relatively used, but I didn't want them to be so used to the point where it was like the age played a massive factor. And then a mileage range, it's for the same thing for the mileage range. Anything below 10,000 is basically new, and anything above 100,000 I believe is egregious. And then as I was doing this, and I was working with this equation right here, I started to realize that this equation was not viable. With all of the crazy thing that's happened with EVs, this equation is not viable because of the fact that EVs have not changed. The Tesla Model 3 and Tesla Model Y have had no physical changes, and the only change that they've actually had is updates to the electrical insides of the car. They've actually found a way to change the horsepower, but other than that, that's the only thing that I could have plugged into this, other than the EV portion of the equation, that would have made sense. So I had to throw out the equation. So for my used car website data, as you can see, I use CarMax, TrueCar, Carvana, and Cars to find data on each of my 4 cars. I found the price, the miles, and the age of each car, and I basically laid it out in a table to compare all of them. And then I took the averages to see the price, the mileage, and the age of each car to hopefully find some trends that I will go over later. In addition, I found the total sales of each car. So starting off with the sedans, you can see here the Audi A4 and the Tesla Model 3. First broken down by month and year, and then second broken down by just year. And interestingly enough, one of the first things that caught my eye was that the Audi A4 has been in steady decline over the past couple of years. And this is consistent with all sedans throughout. It's very interesting to see that the sedans are slowly going down, and you'll see on the next slide that the SUV is not the same. And then for the Model 3, it's been on a pretty steady upward trend. The only thing that stands out is the down year in 2021, and I believe that is thanks to COVID-19. So that should be it's a bit discredited because of that. Now for SUVs, as you can see, the Ford Edge, the ICV, is not in the same situation as the Audi is. It is not in a steady downcline. It's in more of an up and down. And in the last 3 years, it's actually been on more of an upward slope. And then for the Tesla Model Y, same thing here as the Model 3. It's just been on an upward trend. And it's also noticeably smaller because of the recent release of it, which is another reason why a lot of the EVs that I wanted to use could not be used, because they're so recent and there's so little data regarding them. And then finally, I found a predictive model from other sources that I wanted to use because Perot's equation wasn't as effective. I found models that use data from over 2,000 different cars and 20 years of used cars, and basically created an equation that would mold the cars, and it found a way to base off the past cars that have gone through the used car market, found a way to model that. So as you can see here, a bunch of interesting things. The Tesla Model 3 depreciates way better than the Audi A4, and you'll see that in the next slide as well with the Ford Edge and Model Y. Unfortunately, again, because the Model Y is so new, it doesn't have that first chart with the percent paid, percent left, decline percent, and the years left, because it has not been around long enough, and they didn't have an adequate amount of data to build that table. So yeah, that again stands out, that it depreciates far less than the Edge, as you will see in my data summary. So for ICEVs, the average age was about 6.636 for Audis, with a 52% price loss and 55,000 miles, which is pretty close to the Ford, although it's about a year difference, which is interesting, which I'll go over later, with the age being 5.3 years old, and with less of a price loss, which I believe is attributed to the fact that it is a bit younger on average, and also the mileage less, because on average they are less old and have been driven less. So there's a 46% price loss as opposed to the 52% seen in the Audi. And then moving on to the EVs, the Model 3 is about, on average, 4 years old with a 29% price loss and 44,000 miles. And the Model Y is about 2 years old with a 13% price loss and 27,000 miles, almost 28. And I believe this is also interesting because it's about double the age for the Model 3, and it's also been around for almost twice as long. So I think that is accurate as well. And then looking at my ICEV predictive and total sales numbers, as I said before, the A4 decreased steadily in sales, and the Edge was constantly more on an upward trend in the last 3 years. And interestingly enough, the Edge and the A4 were predicted to drop 65% and 66% respectively in the next 10 years. So very, very close for the ICEVs, which makes sense given that they take numbers from a lot of different cars over the years. And given that they are both ICEVs, the numbers would be pretty similar. Now, another thing that I found very interesting was the first year loss. The Audi lost 10% in its first year, and Ford lost 9%. Moving over to the EVs were very different. The Model 3 and Model Y had a 2% and 5% first year loss, something far less than that of the ICEVs. They're losing value way less quick than that of the ICEVs. Both Teslas were on a consistent upward trend, and Model Y and Model 3 were predicted to drop 73% and 50% respectively in the next 10 years, as opposed to the 65 and 66 seen by the ICEVs. And I honestly believe the 3 will fill this number. However, the Y, because it is so new, I believe that this number is skewed because of the lack of data surrounding midsize SUVs and EVs as a whole. So what are my narratives and interpretation of this data? Well, I believe it is clear that there's an EV price premium. Average price is noticeably more on EVs on mileage comparison basis to the ICEVs. They're not proven more reliable, and yet the average prices were $27,000 and $37,000 for the EVs, and $20,000 and $21,000 for the ICEVs, showing that there is a price premium there. It's not just in people's heads. Second thing that I thought was very interesting is there's an SUV takeover in the market, and people don't recognize it as much as they should. As proven by the Audi and Edge sales numbers, non-sedans are outselling sedans considerably over the last 10 years. 19 of the top 25 and all but one of the top 10 selling cars in the year of 2023 were non-sedans, excluding Tesla. Tesla is the only company outside of the Toyota Corolla that has a sedan in the top 10. And the fact that they're breaking that with an EV is incredible because there are no other straight EVs in the top 25, which again, another reason why I had to use both Teslas for the EVs. And then moving from that exact same point, there's no competition for Tesla, which is very interesting. It became clear when determining what cars to use, the fact that stuff like the F-150 Lightning and the Lucid and the Rivian R1T for the truck, none of them had been, one, around long enough, made enough money, or been sold enough to be used for the study. And the Tesla was the only company that had real EV numbers. They're the only company in the top 25 with EVs. It's incredible how little competition they have, and people aren't giving them the respect they deserve. People understand that they're valuable, but I don't think they understand how valuable they actually are. So, finally, the most interesting point, I believe, was that EV prices were only affected by mileage. Now, ICE EVs are evenly affected by mileage and age. If you look at the numbers, a 9-year-old 26,000 mile Edge will cost within $1,000 of a 5-year-old 60,000 mile Edge. But this is not the case for EVs. The average price of EVs over 4 years only dropped $2,500, while an EV within a year of itself and 12,000 miles changed over $6,000 because of that single year difference. And I think that's the most interesting because it provides a new source of car buying, provides a new type of car on the market where you don't have to look at the age, where the age doesn't matter in your purchase. So my limitations. The predictive model. The predictive model was very give or take, and the Model 3 and the Model Y have not been on the market long enough and have yet to have any physical changes in order to fulfill the needs of the equation and predictive model as a whole. And other predictive models of the EVs seemed pretty doubtful as well, as I talked about before. Second, the lack of EV trucks. As I said before, I wanted to include a truck in this project, but it just wasn't viable. Trucks are very prevalent in the ICE EV market, so that's why I wanted to include it. However, there are no true EV trucks other than the F-150 Lightning and the Rivian R1T, but they simply haven't been around long enough and been sold enough for me to use them. Third is COVID-19's effect. During COVID, the car market changed and looked significantly different than it does now and had in the past. So I believe that COVID could have had an effect on some of these numbers, and I wanted to address that and let it be known that that could have had an effect on some of the data, and that's why there's a limitation that I listed here. And fourth, I said hybrids because I wanted to include hybrids in this, but I just didn't see how I could be able to fit them in with the EV and ICE EV debate. And I just didn't have enough time to include hybrids in the study. And I just genuinely wanted to know how would hybrid numbers compare to the numbers found in this study. So in conclusion, I think the most valuable thing that I learned from the study and the answer to my research question was by not losing value as they age and only to mileage, due to the lack of physical updates and real competition, EVs and Tesla specifically have created a vehicle and format of car buying we've never seen before and completely changed how people should approach buying a car. So that is the financial effect of EVs on the car market.
Get your big one. Good.